My daughter-in-law said. We already buried him yesterday. My son had died, and I hadn't even been told. A week later, my furious daughter-in-law came to me and asked, "What are you doing with my life?" I was doing something so ordinary when the phone rang. That's the cruel thing about life. It doesn't send you warnings. It doesn't pause to give you time to sit down and steady yourself. No, it comes barging in while you're threading your needle, or steeping your tea, or folding the same worn dish towel you've been using for years. That afternoon, I was sitting by the window with my knitting basket beside me. The late sun slanted across the rug, and I remember thinking I ought to dust it before Sunday. My hands were slow that day, achy from the rain moving in, so I put the half-finished scarf down and decided to boil some water for tea. Chamomile. Something soft, something that wouldn't jolt me the way coffee does. I had just set the kettle on the stove when the phone rang. I answered without much thought. These days most calls are junk, someone wanting to sell me windows or insurance. I almost didn't pick up. But when I pressed the receiver to my ear, it was her. My daughter-in-law. Her voice was flat. No tremor. No breath caught on the edge of a sob. Just words clipped and cold as if she were reading a line from a weather report. He's already dead. We buried him yesterday. That's all she said. The words didn't land right away. I stood there with the receiver against my ear, one hand still curled around the handle of the kettle, and I thought surely I'd misheard her. A kettle can whistle louder than you expect, and I thought maybe the sound had muddled things. So I said, "What did you say, dear?" But there was nothing. Just the soft hum of the line. And then a click. She had hung up. I didn't even have the chance to ask how or why or where. Not even the dignity of knowing when. My boy, my only boy, and all I got was one sentence spoken like a grocery list. First, I didn't cry. My body refused it. My mind couldn't quite accept it. I set the kettle back on the stove and sat down hard in the nearest chair. The world felt dim, as though someone had drawn the curtains across the day. I remember staring at the wallpaper, those faded little blue violets, and thinking I must have fallen into some cruel dream. When your child dies, you expect a rush of memories, a flood of grief, but all I had was nothing. A blankness. As if my heart had turned to stone inside me. After what might have been a minute or an hour, I lifted the phone again and dialed her back. My hands shook so badly the numbers blurred, but I managed to press them. The call didn't even ring. A mechanical voice told me the line had been blocked. Blocked. My daughter-in-law, the woman I'd once cooked for, the woman I'd mended shirts for, who I had welcomed into my family as though she were my own, she had cut me off. I sat there with that silence pressing against me. And oh honey, I wish I could tell you I was brave, that I shouted or demanded answers. But I didn't. I sat with the receiver pressed against my ear long after the line had gone dead, listening for something, anything. What does a mother do with words like those? The house was so still. Too still. The clock on the wall ticked in its steady rhythm, but it sounded wrong, as if mocking me. My boy was gone, buried, and I had been denied even the chance to stand by his coffin, to lay my hand on the wood, to whisper one last goodbye. The tea kettle began to scream on the stove, a shrill sound that filled the kitchen. I rose, turned off the flame, and poured the hot water into my cup because that's what you do when the world crumbles. You go through the motions. You stir the honey, you hold the cup close, though your hands don't feel steady enough. I tried again to call her. Again blocked. I dialed my son's old number, though I knew it by heart. Of course it didn't connect. It had been disconnected months ago when she insisted they switch to a new line. I thought of neighbors, of friends I might call, but what would I say? That my son had been taken from me not just in death but in secrecy? That the one person who should have stood beside me in grief had slammed the door in my face? My eyes drifted to the photos on the mantel. His school portrait in second grade, his hair sticking up in the back. The picture from his baseball team. Him grinning with his cap crooked. and the one of him as a grown man, arm around his bride, smiling like the whole world lay before them. Now, without warning, that world had ended for him and for me. I sat until the tea went cold. Still no tears. Just the ringing of her words inside me. He's already dead. We buried him yesterday. As the evening shadows crept in, I thought, what kind of cruelty is this? What kind of woman delivers news like that? And why was I not there, when I should have been at his side every moment until the very last breath? I pressed my palm against the cool wood of the table, the same one where my son had once done his homework. I could almost see him, head bent over his papers, his pencil tapping. That memory hurt worse than the words had. It was the first night of many where sleep never came. The morning after that phone call, I felt like I was walking through water. Everything was heavy, slow, muffled, as though the world had been wrapped in thick glass. I hadn't slept a wink. My body was weary, but my mind kept circling back to that one sentence. Those 7 words that had cut me down to nothing. He's already dead. We buried him yesterday. I thought if I sat there in my chair long enough, maybe I'd wake up and find it was a nightmare. But the sun came through the window, pale and steady, and I knew it was real. My son was gone, and I hadn't been allowed to say goodbye. I dressed without thinking, just pulled on a skirt, a blouse, and my old cardigan. The one he used to tease me about, saying, "Ma, you'll wear that thing out before you buy another." I tied my shoes with fingers that didn't feel like mine. And then, without breakfast, without even brushing my hair, I went to the hospital. The corridors smelled of disinfectant and something faintly sweet, like wilted flowers. I knew those halls well. I had walked them many times in those last months while my boy was sick. The nurses used to smile at me, some even called me Mom like he did. But that morning their faces were different. Uneasy. Avoidant. When I asked at the desk, the young man behind the counter glanced at me, then quickly back at his screen. One moment, ma'am." He tapped a few keys, his face pale. Then he stood and went to the back. I waited. Finally, 2 doctors came out. One I recognized, Grant, who had been in charge of my son's care. His face looked pinched, his eyes darting like he wanted to be anywhere but there. I'm so sorry for your loss," he said, his hands twisting. We didn't contact you because..." He hesitated, glancing at the other doctor as though for permission. "Because your daughter-in-law told us you already knew. She said you'd been informed and asked us not to trouble you further." Not to trouble me. The words burned hotter than fire. My boy had lain here, slipping away from the world, and his mother, had been shut out. She had stolen even those last hours from me. I shook my head, the ground seeming to tilt beneath me. "You believed her?" I whispered. "You thought a mother wouldn't want to be with her son?" Neither doctor could meet my eyes. Dr. Grant murmured something about respecting the wishes of the family representative. I nearly laughed, though there was nothing funny in it. Family representative. As if I were nothing. I turned to go, but just as I reached the door, a quiet voice stopped me. "Ma'am," it said. I turned and there she was, a nurse I remembered well. Her name tag read Angela. She was the one who always spoke gently to my boy, even when he was too weak to respond. She looked nervous, glancing over her shoulder before slipping something into my hand. "He wanted you to have this," she whispered. "I couldn't give it to anyone else." My fingers closed around a small folded note. I stepped out into the hallway before opening it, my heart hammering. The paper was worn soft, as though it had been handled many times. I unfolded it, expecting words, some final goodbye, some comfort. But it was blank. Nothing written at all, just his initials scribbled in the bottom corner. For a moment I thought maybe the ink had faded, or perhaps tears had smudged the words away. But no, the page was empty. I clutched it to my chest as though it held all the weight of him. Why had he left me a blank note? Was it unfinished? Was it a message he hadn't had the strength to complete? Or was the blankness itself the message? I didn't know. I still don't. I walked out of the hospital into the bright morning light, the note trembling in my hand. Outside, cars passed, people hurried by, their lives untouched by my grief. The world looked the same, but mine had ended. I thought of the funeral that had already passed without me. The empty chair where I should have sat, the hymns sung without my voice, the dirt covering his coffin without my hand to scatter the flowers. My place had been stolen. I had been erased. And yet I still had the note. Blank or not, it was mine. It was proof that he had thought of me in those last days. That in some way, he had reached across the silence she had built between us. When I came back from the hospital, I thought maybe the walls of this house would comfort me. This place has always been my anchor. The same kitchen where my boy once did his spelling drills. The same porch where he used to sit with a glass of lemonade on hot afternoons. But when I opened the door that evening, the air inside felt wrong. It wasn't just grief, though that was heavy enough. No, it was a silence that carried its own weight. Not the gentle hush of a resting home, but something colder, like the house itself was holding its breath. I set my purse on the counter, poured myself another cup of tea, though I knew I wouldn't drink it. The note with his initials was still in my pocket. I touched it now and again, as though maybe if I held it tightly enough, I'd feel some warmth in return. But when I sat down at the kitchen table, the loneliness pressed against me so hard I thought I might break beneath it. I looked toward the living room. His childhood photographs lined the mantel, just as they always had. Him at 6 years old, missing his 2 front teeth. Him at 12 holding a fishing pole, grinning like he'd caught the biggest thing in the river. Him on graduation day, tall and proud in his cap and gown. They stared back at me now, those frozen moments, almost accusing. I had been shut out of his ending, but the beginning. All those years of scraped knees and bedtime stories, that had been mine. No one could take that. And still I wondered. Why would his wife want me cut off so completely? What had I done? Had I said something to wound her without realizing it? Or was it something darker? A need to erase me from his life altogether? The tea cooled untouched. My eyes kept drifting toward the phone. I thought of calling a friend, maybe the church pastor, someone who might pray with me. But I didn't. Felt like no one would understand. This was not just grief, it was a theft. My place in my son's life had been stolen. And who could I tell about that without sounding mad? The house groaned as night fell. I turned on the lamp in the living room just for company. Its warm light spilled across the rug, touching the photographs. But even that didn't chase the chill. I stood up, walked slowly to the mantel, and straightened one of the frames. It was the wedding photo, the one of him and her on their first day as husband and wife. My boy had looked so happy in that picture. His smile wide, his arms snug around her waist. I had stood beside them that day, proud, believing I'd gained a daughter. I reached to adjust the frame, but my fingers touched only glass and wood. Something felt odd. The frame was lighter than I remembered. I turned it over and felt my breath catch. The photo was gone. Just the empty frame remained. I set it down on the mantel with shaking hands. I searched the shelf, the coffee table, even the floor, thinking maybe it had slipped out. But it hadn't. The photograph was missing. A wave of unease washed over me. It was as though someone had come into my home, into our home, and plucked away the one image that tied me to both of them. A small theft, yes, but it struck deeper than any blow. Why take that photo? Why leave the frame empty as if to mock me? I stood there, staring at that blank rectangle of glass, my reflection faint in it. For the first time since the call, the tears came. They poured out of me, hot and bitter, splashing down onto the hearth. I covered my mouth with my hand, afraid the neighbors might hear my sobs through the walls, though I don't suppose it would have mattered. I sank to the couch, shaking. My chest hurt with each breath. I thought of the funeral seat left empty, and now this, the photo gone. It was as though someone wanted me erased not only from his death, but from the very memory of his life. And then the darker thought crept in. What if it wasn't just grief and cruelty? What if this was intentional? The note in my pocket suddenly felt heavier. Blank, but bearing his initials like he had left me a message only I was meant to understand. My boy had known something, hadn't he? He must have sensed what was happening. That thought both steadied me and broke me. I wiped my face with the hem of my cardigan. The house was too quiet, too still. The clock ticked on, the refrigerator hummed, but it wasn't enough to cover the emptiness. I walked to the door, opened it and stood outside for a moment. The night air was cool, carrying the faint scent of lilacs from the yard. But even the crickets seemed hushed. I went back inside, locked the door and turned out the light. In the dark, the missing photo burned in my mind. An empty frame. An empty chair at the funeral. A blank note. Each one a piece of the same puzzle. But whose hands were arranging it? I sat in my bed, sleepless again, the silence pressing down like a weight. It was in that silence, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards, that I realized I was not just grieving. I was being erased, and I would have to find out why. That night felt endless. I drifted between the living room and the kitchen like a ghost in my own house, unable to rest, unable to settle. Every corner seemed to echo with his absence. I would look at the couch and see him as a boy, stretched out with his sneakers hanging off the edge. I would glance at the back door and remember the way he used to stomp in after school, cheeks red from the cold. Everywhere I turned, the memories rose up, thick and relentless. And yet, something else pressed against me, the strangeness of it all. The blank note, the missing photograph, the cruel phone call. They circled in my head like restless birds. I whispered a prayer aloud, asking God for understanding, for strength. By the time dusk came, the house had fallen into that eerie quiet where even the pipes seemed to hush. I was sitting in my chair by the window, staring out at the fading light, when I heard it. A knock at the door. My first thought was that I had imagined it. No one had knocked on my door since the church ladies months ago, and certainly not after sunset. But there it came again, steady, deliberate, not hurried or timid. I stood slowly, my heart climbing into my throat. For a moment I considered not answering. At my age you learn to be cautious. But something told me this was not the kind of knock you ignore. I went to the door and pressed my hand against the wood. "Who's there?" I called, my voice thinner than I intended. "Mrs. Underwood." A man's voice, calm and respectful. "I'm sorry to trouble you. My name is Daniel Harper. I believe your son wanted me to speak with you." The breath went out of me in a rush. My son. My knees weakened, but I opened the door all the same. There he stood, a young man, no more than 30, dressed in a dark suit that looked almost too strict for his kind face. His shoes were polished, his tie neatly knotted. He held a small leather satchel at his side. His posture was formal, but his eyes were steady, watchful, almost kind. I gripped the edge of the door, unsure whether to let him in. "You said my son?" My voice cracked. "Yes, ma'am." He gave a small bow of his head. "I'm a private investigator. Your son hired me some months ago." I nearly dropped where I stood. My boy, sick as he was, had gone to the trouble of hiring a detective? The thought was unthinkable. And yet, here this man was. "Please," he added gently, "may I come in?" He asked me to wait until after his funeral. "I think it's time you knew why." My hand shook as I opened the door wider. The man stepped inside, removing his hat politely, glancing around the room as though taking stock. We sat at the kitchen table. I poured tea out of habit, though I wasn't sure either of us would drink it. The young man placed his satchel carefully on the table, but he didn't open it right away. Instead, he looked me in the eye. Your son suspected something. He believed someone close to him was interfering with his relationship with you. He hired me to confirm it." The words hung in the air like heavy curtains. I felt them settle into me, confirming what I had begun to fear. I pressed a trembling hand to my lips. "You mean his wife?" He didn't shake his head. "I can't speak to motive. But your son was convinced that letters weren't reaching him, phone calls weren't being passed along, and certain truths were being hidden." My breath caught. I thought of all the times I'd mailed him little notes, birthday cards, clippings from the newspaper I thought he'd enjoy. How many of those had never reached him? The man leaned forward slightly. "He was a practical man, your son. He didn't want to accuse without proof. So he asked me to gather what I could quietly. And he gave me strict instructions. Do not contact his mother until after the funeral. He seemed to believe there might be complications." The word chilled me. Complications. My boy had known something was wrong. He had feared this very outcome, that I would be pushed out, silenced, erased. Tears burned in my eyes, but I forced myself to stay upright, to listen. Why would he wait until after? I whispered. The young man's eyes softened. He said, "If my suspicions are right, she'll need someone after I'm gone. She'll need to know the truth then." I pressed my hands flat against the table to steady myself. The silence of the house pressed heavier than ever, but now it wasn't empty. It was charged, alive with something I couldn't yet name. The man opened his satchel then, sliding a neat stack of folders toward me. "There's more," he said, his voice low but firm. "Evidence. Records. Letters. But before I show you, I wanted you to know why I'm here. Because your son wanted you to have the truth. And he wanted you to know he never stopped loving you." At those words, the tears finally spilled. I covered my face with my hands and wept, not with the hollow grief of the past days, but with a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. He reached for the folders, but I lifted my hand. "Not tonight," I whispered. "Please. I need a little more time." He nodded, gathering his things back up without protest. He stood, placed his hat back on his head, and paused at the door. "I'll return tomorrow, ma'am. At dusk again. Rest tonight. Your son wanted you strong for this." And then he was gone, leaving the house even quieter than before. I stood in the doorway for a long while, watching the dark settle over the yard. My heart was broken, but something else stirred beneath the grief. A thin thread of resolve. My boy had trusted me enough to leave me this truth, and I would not let his trust go to waste. The next day, I hardly moved from my chair by the window. I kept glancing at the clock, at the road outside, at the little gate where he would come. My hands couldn't settle. I picked up my knitting needles and put them down again, tried reading the Bible, even humming hymns I hadn't sung in years. But nothing held me. The silence of the house was too full of waiting. By late afternoon, I had boiled the kettle twice and poured myself tea that went cold both times. I even set out 2 cups, though I felt a fool for it. Still, when the knock came at dusk, steady just like the night before, I was already halfway to the door. There he stood again, Mr. Harper in his dark suit, looking almost out of place against the fading pink sky. He tipped his hat politely. "May I come in, ma'am?" I nodded, stepping aside. I had already laid the table with a cloth and the 2 cups. He noticed, gave the faintest smile, and set his satchel down. "Are you ready?" he asked softly. "As ready as I'll ever be." He opened the satchel and pulled out a thick stack of folders, papers clipped neatly inside. He spread them across the table as carefully as a man setting down fragile china. "I'll show you in pieces," he said, "so it won't overwhelm you." But overwhelm me it did. The first folder held copies of letters. My letters. Birthday cards. Notes scribbled on pretty stationery. Even the little recipe clippings I'd sent. I recognized my handwriting at once. the loops of my M's, the way I dotted my I's low. He slid one across to me. This was intercepted. Postmarked but never opened. Found tucked away in a box in their garage. I held it in my hands, staring at my own words that had never reached him. I thought of how many times I'd wondered why he hadn't written back, why he hadn't even called to say thank you for the silly little notes. All that time I blamed him, or worse, myself. The next folder was thicker. Phone records. Pages of them, with calls from my number listed but erased from his. He noticed the gaps, Harper said. When he asked her about it, she claimed you rarely called. He didn't believe her, so he came to me. My throat ached. I remembered sitting by this very phone, dialing his number late at night, leaving messages that must have been deleted before he ever heard them. So he thought I'd given up on him, I whispered. Not exactly. Harper's eyes met mine. He suspected it wasn't you. That's why he wanted proof. He opened the third folder. Bank records this time. Strange transfers, small amounts taken here and there, accounts I didn't recognize. I can't say for certain what these mean, he admitted. But your son thought some money was being shifted without his full knowledge. He worried she was preparing for a life without him. I gripped the edge of the table, my hands trembling. So she was cutting me out, and maybe cutting him out too. He didn't answer, but his silence was louder than words. Finally, he reached into his satchel again and drew out a small recorder. He set it gently on the table between us. This is the hardest part, he said. But I think you need to hear it. He pressed play. And there it was, my boy's voice. Weak, tired, but still his. My heart lurched so hard I thought it might stop. If you're hearing this, he said, his voice rasping, then my suspicions were right. Mom, I'm sorry. I should have told you sooner. I should have fought harder. But I wanted you to have the truth at least. Don't let them take you out of my story. You belong in it. Always. I pressed my hand to my mouth to stifle the sob that broke free. Hearing his voice again was like being stabbed and healed in the same breath. My boy had known. He had seen what was happening and had tried, in his own way, to reach me across the wall she had built. Harper clicked the recorder off and let the silence fill the room. He wanted you to know he never turned his back on you. He was being misled, yes, but in the end he saw it clearly. Tears streamed down my cheeks. Why would she do this? As Harper packed up his papers, he said, "This isn't over yet. There are legal matters too. But tonight, rest. Your son wanted you to have peace, even if just for one evening." When he left, I sat alone again in the quiet house. But it was different now. Not empty, no, not empty at all. For the first time since that terrible call, I felt my son close to me. I don't think I slept more than a handful of minutes that night. The sealed envelope lay on my nightstand like a stone, heavy even without being opened. I wanted so badly to tear it open, to hear my boy's words, but Harper's voice stayed with me. Read it when your heart is steadier. So I let it sit there, unopened, though I reached out for it more than once in the dark. By morning my eyes were red and my body weak. But there was something different inside me. A thread of determination, faint but strong. I wasn't entirely powerless anymore. My son had trusted me with something, and I meant to honor that. Harper returned the next day as promised. This time he didn't waste words. He sat at my kitchen table, opened his satchel, and pulled out a crisp, official-looking document. "This," he said quietly, "is your son's final will. He revised it not long before his passing. I'm here because he wanted you to understand it fully." I stared at the pages, the legal language swimming before my eyes. Harper slid them closer. "Everything," he said simply, "goes to you." The words knocked the air out of me. "Me?" I whispered. "Yes, ma'am. His home, his accounts, his possessions. All of it. He made you his sole heir." I shook my head, unable to comprehend it. But his wife. Harper's expression stayed calm, though his eyes flickered with something sharp. He wanted her provided for only if you chose. The will leaves that decision entirely in your hands. He wrote it that way deliberately. My heart clenched. Relief and sorrow mixed in me like oil and water. Part of me felt vindicated, that my boy had seen the truth before the end. But another part of me felt guilt, as though I were stealing from her, even after what she'd done. I pressed my palms together, bowing my head. He trusted you, Harper said gently. He wanted you to be the one to decide what's fair. He didn't trust anyone else with that choice. I sat very still, letting those words sink in. Trusted me. Even after the distance, after the silence, he had still trusted me. Harper reached into his satchel once more and pulled out a smaller envelope, sealed and worn at the edges. On the front, in my son's familiar handwriting, were the words, "Mom, forgive me for waiting too long." My hands trembled as I held it. I didn't open it then, not yet. My heart wasn't ready. But I held it close, the way you cradle something fragile and dear. We sat in silence for a time. Finally I asked, why did he keep this from me until after? Why not tell me while he was still alive? Harper looked down at his folded hands. He wanted to protect you. He was afraid if she knew you were aware, she'd try to push harder, maybe even cut you off entirely. He thought this way at least you'd have the truth and the strength to stand on your own when he was gone. Tears burned my eyes again, though softer this time, less like fire and more like rain. He thought of me, I whispered. Even at the end he thought of me. Harper nodded. He did, ma'am. More than you know. When he left that evening, the papers and sealed envelope remained before me on the table. I stared at them until the sun slipped low and shadows filled the house. My boy's final gift. Not money, not property, not things, but trust. He had placed everything in my hands as though to say, "You'll know what to do, Mom." And that was the weight of it. I didn't know what to do. I carried the sealed envelope to my bedroom and set it beside the first blank note he'd left me, the one with just his initials. 2 messages from my boy, one silent, one waiting. I knelt by my bed that night, my knees aching, my hands folded tight. I prayed aloud, the way I used to when he was a child and fevered. Lord, guide me. Don't let me be ruled by anger. Don't let me stumble with bitterness. Show me how to honor him and help me know what to do with what he's left me. The silence after my prayer felt different than before. Not empty, almost expectant, as if an answer might come in time. I climbed into bed, clutching the smaller envelope to my chest. I didn't open it, not yet. But I whispered into the darkness, as though my boy could hear me still. I forgive you, darling, for waiting too long. Forgive you. And I'll carry what you left me with love. The house was quiet, but I was no longer afraid of the quiet. For the first time since his death, it felt like I wasn't truly alone. It didn't take long. News like that never stays buried, no matter how quietly it's written into legal papers. Within days of Harper's visit, word had spread. My son's estate was in my hands, not hers. I should have expected it, but the knock at my door still startled me. This time it wasn't the steady, polite knock of Harper at dusk. No, it was sharp, furious, rattling the door on its hinges. When I opened it, there she stood. My daughter-in-law. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful. Her eyes rimmed red, not from grief, but from rage. She didn't wait for me to invite her in. She shoved past me, the scent of her perfume trailing like smoke, and marched into my kitchen as though she owned it. "How dare you?" she spat, turning to face me, her chest rising and falling in quick bursts. "How dare you go behind my back like this?" I held onto the edge of the counter, steadying myself. I didn't go behind anyone's back. It was his will. His decision. Her laugh was harsh, sharp as glass. "No. No, he wouldn't do that. You tricked him. You put things in his head. He was sick. He didn't know what he was signing. The word stung. He knew exactly what he was doing, I said softly. He wanted me to decide what to do with what he left. Not you. She slammed her hand on the table, making the teacups rattle. Do you understand what you've done? That was supposed to be mine. Our house, our life, I built it with him. And you? She jabbed her finger toward me. You swoop in at the end and take it all. I wanted to tell her I hadn't asked for any of it. That I would have given every penny, every brick of that house, just to have my boy alive and smiling again. But the words caught in my throat. Her fury was so loud, so consuming, but beneath it I saw something else, desperation. Her voice cracked when she shouted next, and tears pooled at the corners of her eyes. You don't get it, she choked. He was mine. Mine. And no matter what you do, you can't change that. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I stood there, my heart pounding, and she stood trembling, her fists clenched at her sides. Finally, I whispered, I never wanted to take him from you. I only wanted to be his mother. That's all. Something in her face faltered. She turned away, pressing her hand to her mouth. For a moment she looked small, almost like a child herself. But then she straightened, her voice hardening again. You don't understand what it was like, she said. Always second to you. Every story he told, every memory, it was always mom this, mom that. I couldn't compete with you. And now, even in death, he leaves everything to you. Her words struck deep. I had never thought of it that way, that my closeness with my son might have felt like a shadow to her. I said quietly, he loved us both, you know. Love isn't a competition. But she shook her head violently, tears spilling now. No, you don't understand. I already knew about the will. I found it months ago. I thought I could keep it hidden. I thought if I just controlled things, you'd fade away, and it would all be mine anyway. I gasped, covering my mouth. She had known. All this time she had known. She collapsed into a chair, her body shaking. I thought if I kept you out, if I erased you, he'd have no choice but to be mine completely. But he knew, didn't he? He knew what I was doing. I couldn't speak. My heart ached with grief, but also something else, pity. She was furious, yes, but beneath the fury was guilt. And beneath the guilt was a wound so deep it had twisted her into someone unrecognizable. She looked at me then, her eyes wild, pleading. You can't keep it all. You won't. Tell me you won't. I didn't answer right away. I looked around my quiet kitchen, at the teacups, at the photos still lining the mantel, at the envelope from my son waiting in the other room. I don't know yet, I said finally, my voice steady but low. I don't know what I'll do. But I do know this, he wanted me to choose. And I will. In my own time. Her face twisted, half in anger, half in anguish. She pushed back from the table, standing abruptly. You'll regret this, she hissed, though her voice broke on the last word. She stormed out the door, slamming it so hard the walls shook. I stood there long after she left, my hands trembling against the counter. The house was quiet again, but this time the quiet wasn't empty. It was full of everything unspoken, everything unresolved. My boy had trusted me with his last gift. And now, his wife's fury only made it clearer. This wasn't just about property. It was about wounds old and hidden, that were finally breaking open. And I knew then, sooner or later, I would have to face the truth of why she had done it all. 2 days passed before I saw her again. I half expected another storm at my door, another round of accusations and slammed fists on the table. But when the knock finally came, it was softer, hesitant. When I opened the door, there she stood, shoulders slumped, no makeup on her face, her eyes swollen and tired. She didn't push past me this time. She just whispered, "May I come in?" I stepped aside. She sat at the kitchen table like a child waiting for punishment, her hands twisting in her lap. For a long time neither of us spoke. The kettle hissed on the stove and I poured us both tea. She wrapped her hands around her cup, though she didn't drink. Finally she spoke. Her voice was low, rough. "You deserve to know why." I kept quiet, letting her find her own way into the words. She took a shaky breath. "I never had a mother. She left when I was 2. My father, he wasn't much better. He worked nights, drank most mornings. There wasn't anyone to tuck me in or pack my lunch. I learned early not to expect anyone to stay." Her eyes glistened, but she didn't look at me. "When I met him, your son, it was like stepping into another world. He talked about you all the time. How you used to make his Halloween costumes, how you stayed up late sewing a patch onto his jeans, how you cheered louder than anyone at his games. You were his anchor, his safe place." And every time he told one of those stories, something inside me twisted. I felt my breath catch, but I stayed silent, listening. She pressed her fingers against her forehead. "I was jealous. Not of you exactly, but of what you had. That bond. I wanted to be the one he turned to for comfort, the one he called first. But no matter what, you were always there in his heart. And I couldn't stand it. Every time he smiled at you, every time he mentioned you, I felt like a little girl again, watching someone else get the love I never had." Her voice cracked then and a sob broke free. "So I did the cruelest thing I could think of. I told myself if I cut you out, maybe I'd finally have all of him. Maybe he'd need me the way he needed you." Tears slipped down my own cheeks. I thought of the blank note, the missing photo, the erased calls. All the ways she had carved me out of his life. And now, hearing it laid bare, I felt not just anger but sorrow. She looked up at me finally, her face streaked with tears. "I even lied to him sometimes. Told him you'd refused to visit, that you didn't call back. He didn't believe me at first, but when the silence kept growing, he started to doubt. I could see it in his eyes, like I'd planted a seed, and it was taking root." Her hands shook around the teacup. "And yet he still loved you. Even when I tried to turn him, he still loved you. He found his way back to you in the end, didn't he?" I nodded slowly, my throat too tight for words. She let out a bitter laugh that turned into a sob. "I ruined everything. I tried to erase you, and all I did was erase myself. He knew. He saw through me in the end. And now I'm left with nothing but guilt." For a moment, the kitchen was filled with nothing but her quiet weeping and the ticking clock on the wall. I wanted to be furious. I wanted to shout at her for stealing my last moments with my son. But looking at her then, broken, trembling, confessing not out of defense but out of raw truth, I couldn't find anger in me. Instead, I reached for her hand. She flinched, surprised, but I held it steady. "You were wrong," I said softly, "terribly wrong. But you were also hurting. And hurt people can do cruel things." Her tears fell harder. "I don't deserve forgiveness." "Maybe not," I whispered. "But forgiveness isn't something any of us deserve. It's something we give because we can't carry the weight of hate forever." She looked at me with wide, broken eyes, as though she had never been offered such a thing before. We sat that way for a long while, her hand in mine, the tea cooling between us. The house didn't feel so empty then. It felt full of something else, pain, yes, but also the fragile beginnings of understanding. When she finally stood to leave, she paused at the door. "I wanted to hurt you," she admitted. "But in the end, I only hurt myself. I'm sorry." The words weren't enough to mend the years of silence, the funeral I missed, the goodbye I was robbed of. But they were a start. And as she walked out into the night, I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot I hadn't even realized was strangling me. My boy had left me his final gift. And maybe, just maybe, it was more than property and papers. Maybe it was this moment too. This chance to face the truth, to choose whether I would cling to bitterness or step toward mercy. I didn't know yet which I would choose. But I knew the choice was mine. That night after her confession, I didn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the shadows shifting across the plaster like restless thoughts. Her words echoed in me. Her jealousy, her lies, her desperation. I wanted to hate her, truly I did. It would have been easier to tuck myself into the comfort of anger. But instead what I felt most was sorrow. By dawn, I was sitting at the kitchen table with my Bible open in front of me. My hands rested on either side of it, but my eyes weren't on the page. They were far away, drifting back through the years. I remembered her on the day of the wedding, standing beside my boy in her white gown. She'd looked so radiant, so hopeful. I'd thought then that I had gained a daughter, that love would bind us together. How quickly it had unraveled. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer. Lord, give me wisdom. Don't let me be guided by vengeance. Show me what is right. By the time the sun fully rose, I had my answer. Not a thunderbolt, not a vision, just a quiet knowing in my chest. Mercy. It wasn't the easy path, but it was the one my boy would want me to take. That afternoon I asked her to come. She arrived hesitant, her eyes still weary from crying, her posture small. She sat across from me at the same kitchen table where she'd poured out her guilt 2 nights before. I've made a decision, I told her. My voice was steady, though my hands trembled slightly. She looked up, wary, as if bracing for a blow. I can't change the past, I continued. You robbed me of moments I'll never get back. You hurt me in ways you may never fully understand. But I will not let that be the end of our story. So, I'm giving you the house. Her mouth fell open. The house? You give it to me? After everything I did? Yes, I said simply. Because I don't want you to feel homeless ever again. You said you never had a mother. Well, I can't be that for you, not in the way you lost it. But I won't cast you aside either. You'll have a place. A roof that feels steady. Tears sprang to her eyes, spilling before she could stop them. Why? Why would you do that after all I've done to you? I reached across the table, placing my hand gently over hers. Because bitterness is a prison, child. And I won't live the rest of my days behind bars. I forgive you, not because you earned it, but because my son deserves a legacy of love, not hate. She broke then, sobbing into her hands, the sound raw and unguarded. I sat with her, my hand resting steady, the weight of my choice settling in. It wasn't an easy mercy, it was the hardest thing I'd ever done. But in that moment I felt a kind of peace I hadn't known in weeks. Later, when Harper came to visit and I told him my decision, his brow furrowed. Ma'am, with respect, that's risky. She's hurt you before. What if she betrays you again? I smiled sadly. Then that's on her. But I won't let fear rule me. My son left me the power to choose, and I choose mercy. He studied me for a moment, then gave a slow nod. You're braver than most, Mrs. Brave wasn't how I felt. My heart was tender, my grief still sharp. But I knew I had chosen a path my boy would bless. He'd wanted me to carry his legacy, and I decided it would not be one of bitterness. That evening, after she had gone and the house was quiet again, I sat with both envelopes beside me, the blank note and the sealed letter marked Mom. Forgive me for waiting too long. I hadn't opened the latter yet, but I pressed them both against my chest and whispered into the silence. I've forgiven, son, just as you asked me to. And for the first time since the call that shattered me, I felt something soft and steady in my heart. Hope. Mercy is never easy, but once chosen, it has a way of opening doors you didn't know were there. After I gave her the house, she came to me a few days later, her eyes swollen but her voice steady. I don't deserve what you've done for me, she said, but I want to make it mean something. That's how the idea was born, not from lawyers or papers, but from 2 grieving women sitting at a kitchen table with cooling tea between them. She said she wanted to do something for children who grew up like her. Abandoned, unloved, lost. And I thought of my boy, who'd once told me he wished no child ever had to feel forgotten. So with the funds left to me, and with her help, we began a small foundation. It started simple. A name, a vision, a little office in town with peeling paint. We called it the Haven Fund. A place for children left behind. She threw herself into the work as if trying to build her penance brick by brick. She organized drives, called donors, spoke to groups. I watched her change little by little, as though mercy had given her a second chance at herself. As for me, I found purpose again. Grief still lived in my chest, sharp and sudden at times, but it had somewhere to go now. Every blanket we donated, every meal served, every child hugged. It felt like a thread tying me back to my son. His love was still alive, carried forward into the lives of others. Months passed, and the day came when we launched the foundation officially. There was a small ceremony, nothing fancy, just a gathering of neighbors, a few local officials, and some children already touched by our work. I wore my best dress, the one my son once said made me look like Sunday morning. When it was over, when the last chairs were stacked and the crowd had gone, I finally pulled out the envelope I had kept for so long. The one sealed with his handwriting. Mom, forgive me for waiting too long. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper folded neatly, and on it just one line. If you're reading this, Mom, it means I was right to trust you even after death. The tears came freely then, not the heavy, bitter tears of before, but ones that felt like rain after a drought. He had trusted me. Even in the end, even after being pulled away, he believed I would carry his love forward. And I had. That night, I lit a candle by his photo, one of the few she hadn't taken, and whispered into the quiet, "We did it, son. Your love didn't end with you. It's still here, living on in the children who need it most." The house was quiet but no longer empty. It was filled with his legacy, and with a love that even death could not erase.